The observation deck hummed with quiet anticipation as Dr. Velksith adjusted the monitoring array for the 100th time that cycle. The collective's finest xenobiologists had gathered aboard Research Station Meridian 7, their various forms clustered around holographic displays that flickered with data streams. They had come from across 17 star systems, each species sending their most distinguished minds to witness what promised to be the definitive study on the newcomers who called themselves humans. "Subject vitals are stable," announced Crix, their crystalline body refracting the blue light of the monitors into dancing rainbows across the sterile walls. Cortisol levels elevated, but within predicted parameters. The human appears unaware of the true scope of our experiment. Velksith's tentacles coiled with satisfaction. 300 cycles of preparation had led to this moment. The collective had encountered countless species during their expansion across the galaxy, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses with scientific precision. But humans presented an anomaly that demanded investigation. Their recent arrival in galactic society had been marked by unusual claims and concerning demonstrations of what they called determination. The human in question, designated Subject 7, but apparently named Marcus Chon, according to the intake documentation, sat in the primary testing chamber below. Through the one-way observation glass, the scientists watched him examine his surroundings with apparent calm. The chamber was designed to appear comfortable, a simple room with basic amenities, carefully calibrated to seem harmless while containing the most sophisticated stress testing apparatus the collective had ever assembled. "Beginning Phase 1, Velksith announced, manipulating the controls with practiced ease. Environmental pressure test. The chamber's atmospheric composition began to shift, oxygen levels dropping by increments too small for most species to detect consciously. The human's breathing pattern changed almost immediately, becoming deeper and more deliberate. His chest expanded further with each breath, automatically compensating for the thinning air. "Remarkable," whispered Thane, the Gorvan observer, whose own species required triple the oxygen humans claimed to need. "He's adapting already. The physiological response time is extraordinary." Marcus stood and began a series of movements that the database identified as calisthenics. Push-ups, the humans called them. His muscles worked smoothly despite the reduced oxygen, his face showing concentration but not distress. The monitoring equipment tracked his heart rate climbing to push more blood through his system, his metabolism shifting to anaerobic processes that should have left him exhausted within minutes. But minutes passed, then an hour, and the human continued. When he finally stopped, it was to drink water and examine the chamber walls with curious eyes. Not from exhaustion. Velksith felt something unfamiliar stir in their consciousness. Unease, perhaps. The oxygen was now at 70% of the human's stated normal level, equivalent to what their files called high altitude on their homeworld. Most species would be unconscious or dying. This human was mildly winded. "Phase 2, Velksith declared, refusing to let doubt color their scientific rigor. Temperature variance. The chamber's climate control engaged, dropping the temperature rapidly. Frost began forming on the metal surfaces. Marcus noticed immediately, his breath now visible in the frigid air. He rubbed his arms, then began moving again, this time in jumping patterns that generated heat through motion. "Subject is shivering," Crix observed. "Involuntary thermogenesis activated." "Yes, but observe the duration," Velksith countered. "Most carbon-based life forms would enter hypothermic shock by now. The human is uncomfortable but functional." They watched Marcus explore the chamber more thoroughly, running his hands along the walls as if searching for seams or weaknesses. His fingers were turning red from the cold, but he showed no signs of frostbite. When he found the food dispenser, he consumed the provided rations without hesitation, his body converting the calories to heat with impressive efficiency. Hours crawled past. The temperature dropped further, then spiked upward into ranges that should have induced heat stroke. Marcus adapted each time, slowing his movements in the heat, increasing them in the cold, drinking precise amounts of water as if his body contained some internal calculator for hydration needs. "This is impossible," Thane said finally, their translator capturing the distress in their clicking language. "Our models predicted failure by now. The humans should be begging for relief. Perhaps the psychological testing will prove more effective," suggested Ixthor, the insectoid psychologist who had designed the next phase. "Physical endurance is interesting, but all sentient minds have breaking points." Velksith initiated Phase 3 with some reluctance. They had not expected to need it so soon, but the humans' physical resilience demanded they escalate the testing protocol. The chamber's lights shut off completely, plunging Marcus into absolute darkness. For several minutes, the human remained still. The infrared cameras showed him sitting with his back against the wall, his head tilted as if listening. Then, slowly, he began to move through the darkness with careful, deliberate steps, his hands outstretched to map his environment through touch. "He's creating a mental map," Ixthor observed with what might have been admiration, using proprioception and spatial memory to navigate without visual input. The scientists watched Marcus establish a routine in the darkness. He found the food dispenser by memory, exercised in a clear space he'd identified, and even appeared to sleep in scheduled intervals, despite having no way to measure time. Days passed. The collective researchers began working in shifts, but the human below maintained his patterns. Velksith added auditory stressors, random loud noises, discordant frequencies, whispers at the edge of hearing. Marcus flinched at first, then appeared to categorize and dismiss them. When phantom images were projected into the darkness, shapes designed to trigger primal fears in most species, the human investigated them with wary curiosity rather than panic. "His neural activity shows elevated stress markers," Crix reported, "but his decision-making centers remain fully engaged. He's aware these are tests. He's analyzing them." That realization sent a ripple of discomfort through the observation deck. The experiment was designed to push subjects beyond rational thought, to find the breaking point where instinct overrode intelligence. But this human was treating their carefully crafted, psychological torment as a puzzle to solve. Velksith made a decision that would later be questioned by the Collective's Ethics Board. They activated Phase 4 ahead of schedule, overlaying all previous stressors simultaneously. Thin air, freezing temperatures, darkness, and now isolation messaging. Subliminal suggestions that he had been forgotten, that no rescue would come, that this darkness was forever. Marcus Chun sat down in the center of the chamber and began to sing. The translator struggled with the melody, but the emotional resonance was clear. It was not a song of despair, but of defiance, a rhythmic chant that the database identified as originating from humanity's ancient maritime traditions. A sea shanty, sung by sailors who had faced storms and starvation in the crushing vastness of Earth's oceans. The human's voice filled the chamber, steady and strong despite his circumstances. He sang of ships and stars, of journeys and homecomings, and when one song ended, he began another. His vital signs showed stress, showed discomfort, showed the physiological toll of the environment. But they also showed something the collective had not anticipated. Marcus Chun was not trying to survive their test. He was refusing to let it break him. In the observation deck, Velksith's tentacles trembled as they reviewed the data streaming across their displays. Every model, every prediction, every carefully calculated breaking point had been exceeded. And still, the human sang into the darkness, his voice a declaration that echoed through the monitoring equipment like an accusation. What had they unleashed in their laboratory? And more importantly, what would happen when they finally pushed hard enough to find the limit they were searching for? The experiment was supposed to demonstrate human weakness. Instead, It was beginning to reveal something far more terrifying. That perhaps humans had no conventional limits at all. Only choices about when to stop enduring and start fighting back. Velxith reached for the Phase 5 controls with appendages that no longer felt quite steady. The real test, they realized with growing dread, was only beginning. The singing stopped on the 7th day, and for a brief moment, Velxith felt something resembling relief wash through their neural pathways. Perhaps they had finally found the threshold. Perhaps the human had reached his breaking point. Then Marcus Chon started talking instead. Day 7. "I think," the human said to the empty darkness, his voice rough from dehydration, despite the water rations. "Could be day 8. Hard to tell when you're living in a sensory deprivation tank designed by aliens who clearly read too many torture manuals." Ixthor's antennae vibrated with confusion. "Is he speaking to us? Does he know we're observing?" "Negative," Crix responded, analyzing the vocal patterns. "He's speaking to himself. It's a coping mechanism. Humans use vocalization to regulate their emotional states and maintain cognitive function during isolation." Marcus continued his one-sided conversation, and the scientists found themselves leaning closer to the audio feeds, captivated despite themselves. "So here's what I figure," he said, doing another set of exercises in the dark, his movements now so practiced he never collided with the walls. "You're testing endurance. That's the whole point of this setup. The oxygen thing, the temperature swings, the darkness, all of it. You want to see when I break." Velxith's tentacles coiled tighter. The human had deduced the experiment's purpose. This level of analytical thinking under duress was not supposed to be possible. "But here's the thing about humans," Marcus said. And there was something in his voice now. Something that made the translator hum with uncertainty as it tried to capture the nuance. "We're really, really good at not breaking. It's kind of our whole deal. You want to know why?" He paused as if expecting an answer from the darkness, then laughed, a sound that held no humor but plenty of sharp edges. "Because my species evolved on a death world, and every single one of my ancestors survived long enough to have kids. That's billions of years of natural selection for pure stubborn refusal to die." The observation deck had gone silent. Even the constant hum of the monitoring equipment seemed muted. Every researcher present had studied Earth's classification, of course. Category 9 Death World, unsuitable for colonization by 73% of known species. But the implications of that classification were becoming horrifyingly clear. Marcus was pacing now, his footsteps precise in the darkness. "You've got me in thin air? I'm from a species that climbed mountains so high that the air couldn't support most life, and we did it for fun. For bragging rights. We put flags on peaks where we should have died, and then argued about who got there first." Thane made a sound like grinding stones. Their own species, the Gorvan, avoided their homeworld's modest highlands because the reduced oxygen made them dizzy. This human spoke of climbing toward death as recreation. "Cold?" Marcus continued, and his breath puffed visibly in the frigid air. "My ancestors walked across frozen continents wearing animal skins. We survived ice ages, plural. We hunted megafauna in blizzards and called it Tuesday." The temperature in the chamber was now -15 degrees standard. Marcus was shivering constantly, but he was still moving, still talking, still refusing to curl up and wait for rescue. "And the heat? We evolved in African savannas where the sun could literally cook you. We developed the ability to sweat, to dump heat like biological radiators. We can run prey animals to death through pure endurance in heat that would kill most predators." Velxith checked the data streams again, looking for signs of delirium or hallucination. But Marcus's brain activity showed clear, focused thought processes. He was not raving. He was educating his captors. Darkness and isolation? A bitter laugh. Our prisons use solitary confinement as punishment for our worst criminals. And you know what? Some of them survive decades. Not because they want to, but because human minds are really hard to completely break. We're wired for pattern recognition, for finding hope in nothing, for creating meaning out of chaos. Marcus stopped pacing and stood in the center of the chamber. Even through the infrared imaging, his posture radiated defiance. So here's my message to whoever's running this experiment. I know you're watching. I know you're taking notes. And I want you to understand something really important. He looked up, not quite facing the observation deck, but close enough to make several researchers flinch. I'm not special. I'm not some elite soldier or enhanced human. I'm a cargo hauler. I load and unload freight for a living. I'm completely average by human standards. And if this is your best shot at breaking an average human, you're going to have a really bad time when you meet the ones who actually train for this stuff. The implications of that statement rippled through the observation deck like a shockwave. If this was baseline human endurance, what were their military personnel capable of? Their specialized operatives? The collective's intelligence suggested that Earth had entire units trained specifically for survival in hostile environments. Ixthor's translator crackled. We need to stop this. We're not testing endurance anymore. We're antagonizing a species we don't understand. No, Velxith said, though their tentacles trembled with uncertainty. We need data. We need to know their limits. For the collective's security, we must know what they can endure. But even as they spoke, Velxith wondered who this experiment was really protecting. Phase 5 began its automated sequence, and new stressors flooded the chamber. The gravity increased by 30%, pressing down on Marcus with invisible weight. Disorienting sounds played at frequencies designed to trigger nausea. The temperature began cycling rapidly between extremes. Marcus grunted as the gravity slammed him to his knees. For a moment, he stayed down, and Velxith felt that strange relief again. Then the human began to crawl, adapting his movement to the new conditions. When the sounds made him retch, he vomited into a corner and kept moving. When the temperature swings made his body shake uncontrollably, he curled tight to conserve heat, then spread out to dissipate it. Over and over with mechanical precision. He's treating this like a problem to solve, Crix observed. Their crystalline structure flickering with what might have been distress. Not a punishment to endure. He's experimenting with responses, learning what works, adapting in real time. Days 8, 9, and 10 blurred together. The researchers watched in growing horror as Marcus Chon systematically defeated every stress test they implemented. When they introduced airborne irritants, he breathed through fabric torn from his clothing. When they generated electromagnetic fields to disrupt his sleep cycles, he established polyphasic sleep patterns, napping in brief intervals. When they played sounds of screaming designed to trigger empathetic distress, he recognized them as recordings and dismissed them. The human was losing weight, his body consuming its own reserves to maintain function. His hands trembled from fatigue, and his voice had become a raspy whisper. But he was still conscious, still analytical, still refusing to signal for the emergency stop that would end the experiment. On day 11, Velxith made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing the archived footage, they noticed something they had missed in real time. Marcus was making marks on the wall with his fingernails, tiny scratches invisible to standard imaging, but clear in enhanced scans. What is he writing? Thane asked. The translator worked for several seconds before rendering the message. It was not a plea for help or a countdown of days. It was something far worse. Marcus Chon was keeping a detailed log of every test they had run, analyzing the patterns, deducing the observation schedule, and calculating the probable monitoring capabilities of the chamber. He was treating his captivity as an intelligence-gathering operation. The final entry made. Velksith's circulatory fluid run cold. If this is first contact protocol, their civilization values data over ethics. Probability of hostile intent increasing. Must remember, endurance is not submission. Survival is not cooperation. When this ends, Earth must know. The observation deck erupted in agitated conversation. Multiple voices demanded the experiment's immediate termination. Ixtor was insisting they had violated several collective regulations. Thane was calculating the diplomatic catastrophe if Earth discovered what they had done to one of their citizens. But Velksith was staring at the display, at the human curled in the darkness below, at the marks on the wall that told a story of a mind that refused to break even as the body began to fail. They had sought to test human endurance and define its limits. Instead, they had created evidence of collective cruelty and handed it to a species that might not forgive such treatment. Worse, they had demonstrated to this one human exactly how the collective thought, how they operated, what they valued. Marcus Chun had learned far more about them than they had learned about him. The experiment had not ended in the data they sought. It had ended in the growing certainty that they had made a terrible mistake. And the human in the chamber below was intelligent enough, stubborn enough, and angry enough to ensure that mistake would have consequences far beyond this station. The emergency meeting of the Research Council convened while Marcus Chun remained in the testing chamber, now on day 13 of what was supposed to have been a 72-hour maximum exposure study. Velksith stood before their peers, tentacles arranged in the posture of contrition, while the holographic representations of the collective's oversight committee flickered with barely contained agitation. "Explain," demanded Council Director Jothic. Their quadrupedal form projected at twice life size to emphasize their authority. "Explain how a routine endurance study has become a potential interstellar incident." Velksith pulled up the data streams, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Heart rate variability, stress hormone cascades, cellular damage markers, all painting a picture of a body under siege. But beside those metrics ran others. Problem-solving scores, pattern recognition rates, strategic thinking indicators. The human was suffering, but his mind remained dangerously sharp. "The subject has exceeded every predictive model," Velksith explained. "We theorized that humans possessed above-average endurance based on preliminary observations. We were wrong. This is not above average. This is something we have no classification for." Crix stepped forward, their crystalline body refracting the dim light of the council chamber. Permission to present comparative analysis. When Jothic gestured assent, they continued. "We have tested 217 species using modified versions of this protocol. The average subject signals for emergency extraction within 47 hours. The longest previous duration was 93 hours, achieved by a Vroxian soldier who subsequently required 16 cycles of medical intervention. And this human?" Jothic's voice held a dangerous edge. 312 hours and counting, Crix said quietly, "with significantly more severe stressors than we used on the Vroxian subject. His physical condition is deteriorating, but he shows no signs of psychological collapse." The council chamber fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of station life seemed muted. Finally, Ixtor spoke up, their insectoid voice translator carrying unusual emotion. "There is another concern. The human has been documenting our testing methods. He has deduced the presence of observers, calculated our likely technological capabilities, and assessed our ethical frameworks, or rather our lack thereof." Jothic's form shifted, a sign of discomfort. "You believe he will report this?" "I believe he has already composed his report," Ixtor replied. "During the periods we assumed he was sleeping, enhanced audio analysis reveals he was subvocalizing, rehearsing statements, organizing his observations, preparing testimony. The human is not merely enduring this test. He is building a case against us. That statement triggered a cascade of agitated responses from the council members. Velksith watched as the political implications began to dawn on the collective's leadership. Humanity was new to the galactic community, largely unknown, but growing rapidly in influence. They had technology that seemed primitive, but proved surprisingly effective. They had diplomatic ties that expanded daily. And now the collective had inadvertently provided them with evidence of scientific torture. Terminate the experiment, Shafik ordered. Immediate medical intervention for the subject. Full memory suppression if necessary. No, Velksith said, surprising themselves with their own objection. When Javik's projections swiveled toward them, they continued quickly, memory suppression will fail. Human neurology has proven resistant to standard techniques. If we attempt it and fail, we confirm both the torture and the cover-up attempt. Our only option is transparency and mitigation. You want us to admit to this? Shafik's tone was incredulous. I want us to end this before the human dies in our care, Velksith said. Because if Marcus Chon expires in that chamber, we will have killed a citizen of a species that has demonstrated remarkable loyalty to their own kind. Our intelligence reports suggest humans have declared wars over less. As if responding to the discussion, an alarm began blaring through the observation deck. Thane rushed to the monitors, their stony features managing to convey alarm. Cardiac arrhythmia. The human's heart is failing. The council meeting dissolved into chaos. Medical teams were scrambled, decontamination protocols initiated, emergency extraction authorized. Velksith raced to the observation deck, arriving in time to see medical personnel flooding into the chamber. Their suits' lights finally banishing the darkness that had been Marcus. Chon's world for nearly 2 weeks dot through the monitors. Velksith watched the human's response. Despite his obvious physical distress, despite the cardiac event that was actively threatening his life, Marcus did not show relief. His eyes tracked each medical technician with cold calculation. When they tried to sedate him, he fought with what little strength remained, forcing them to physically restrain him. He thinks we're executing him, Ixthor observed grimly. He believes this is the final phase of the experiment. That realization cut deeper than any council reprimand could. They had broken trust so thoroughly that their mercy was interpreted as murder. The medical team finally managed to sedate Marcus, his last conscious act being to scratch one more message on the wall, fingers leaving blood streaks as his nails tore. Velksith had it translated immediately. 2 words in the human's language. Remember this. The medical ward hummed with activity as alien physicians worked to stabilize their unexpected patient. Human physiology was not well documented in collective medical databases, forcing the team to extrapolate from related carbon-based species. They flushed toxins, repaired cellular damage, restored electrolyte balance, and fought to regulate the erratic heartbeat that threatened to stop altogether. Velksith observed from behind sterile barriers, watching as the full extent of their experiment's damage became clear. Muscle atrophy from the high-gravity exposure, frostbite scarring on extremities, lung damage from atmospheric variations, psychological trauma markers that registered off their scales. And yet, even sedated, Marcus Chun's brain activity showed unusual patterns, suggesting that some part of him remained aware, remained vigilant. He's dreaming, reported the Nixal physician, their tentacles moving in gestures of medical significance. Unusually vivid neural activity for someone under sedation. His unconscious mind is processing threat scenarios. Can you determine content? Velksith asked. Not without invasive procedures, which I will not authorize. The physician's tone brooked no argument. This patient has suffered enough from our research ambitions. 3 cycles passed before Marcus regained consciousness. Velksith was present, having remained in the medical ward, despite the council's suggestion that they distance themselves from the situation. When the humans' eyes opened, they immediately fixed on Velksith with an intensity that made the scientist's biochemistry spike with instinctive alarm. "Water," Marcus rasped, his voice damaged from dehydration and screaming they had not known about because they had muted that audio feed on day 9. A medical drone provided liquid nutrients. Marcus drank slowly, his eyes never leaving Velksith. Finally, he spoke again. "How long?" 13 days, Velksith answered, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. "You were in the chamber for 312 hours before your cardiac event." Marcus absorbed this information with no visible reaction. What was the record before me? The question was so unexpected that Velksith answered without thinking. 93 hours. A Vroxian soldier. Good. Marcus's lips twitched in something that was not quite a smile. Wanted to make sure I made a point. Why didn't you activate the emergency extraction? The question had haunted Velksith since day 3. You knew it was there. We know you identified the mechanism on day 2. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and when they opened again, they held something that made Velksith understand why Earth's predators had learned to fear human persistence. "Because," the human said quietly, "I needed you to see what you were doing. I needed you to watch, day after day, as you tortured someone who couldn't fight back. I needed you to own it. We were conducting scientific research on human endurance capabilities," Velksith protested weakly. "No," Marcus said. And despite his physical weakness, his voice carried absolute certainty. "You were torturing someone because you were afraid. Afraid of what humans might be capable of. Afraid that we don't fit into your neat categories and classifications. You wanted to find our breaking point, and when you couldn't, when I kept surviving, it scared you even more." The accusation hung in the sterile air. Velksith wanted to deny it, but the data did not lie. Every escalation of the testing protocol had come not from scientific necessity, but from growing desperation to force the human into submission. "What happens now?" Velksith asked. Marcus leaned back against the medical bed, his body still recovering from the ordeal they had inflicted. "Now you make a choice. You can try to cover this up, maybe succeed for a while, but humans are really good at finding out secrets. Eventually, Earth will learn what you did. Or you can own it publicly, release the data, let the collective see exactly what happened here. That would be political suicide for everyone involved." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But it would also be honest, and it would show that the collective is capable of acknowledging mistakes. That's worth something to my people. We understand mistakes. What we don't forgive is cowardice." Velksith. The Collective Council's public hearing chamber had never held so many observers. Representatives from 47 species crowded the space, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity united by singular purpose. Witnessing the testimony of Marcus Chun, 6 weeks had passed since his extraction from the testing chamber. 6 weeks of medical recovery, diplomatic negotiations, and increasingly frantic collective attempts to control the narrative. But humans, as Velksith had learned through painful experience, were remarkably resistant to narrative control. Marcus entered the chamber walking on his own power, refusing the assistance that several species would have required after such an ordeal. His physical recovery had been documented by independent physicians, the evidence of frostbite scarring and muscle atrophy serving as silent testimony to what he had endured. He wore simple civilian clothing, no uniform or official designation, emphasizing his status as an ordinary citizen, caught in extraordinary circumstances. Velksith watched from the researchers' gallery, mandated to attend as part of their cooperation agreement. Beside them sat Crix, Ixthor, Thane, and 17 other scientists who had participated in the experiment. All faced potential sanctions ranging from research privileges revocation to criminal charges. Depending on how the collective chose to respond, Council Director Jafik presided over the hearing. Their form projected large enough to address the entire chamber. This tribunal convenes to investigate allegations of improper research methodology and potential violation of sapient rights. Marcus Chon of Earth, you have elected to testify without diplomatic representation. Do you confirm this choice? I do, Marcus replied, his voice still carrying the raspy quality from his screaming sessions. My government offered lawyers and ambassadors. I declined. This isn't about politics. It's about what happened and what it means. Then please provide your account of events. Marcus did not use notes. He did not reference the detailed reports he had prepared. Instead, he simply told the story in chronological order, his voice steady and factual. He described the initial invitation to participate in standard physiological research, the informed consent forms that had mentioned environmental variations, but not torture, the chamber that had seemed comfortable until it became a prison knot as he spoke. Holographic displays showed the data Velksith's team had collected, presented now not as research findings, but as evidence of escalating cruelty. The oxygen deprivation graphs, the temperature extremes, the sensory isolation protocols. Each metric was paired with footage of Marcus's responses, carefully edited by human technicians to highlight his suffering while demonstrating his refusal to break. On day 5, Marcus said, and his voice finally showed emotion, I realized you weren't going to stop. You weren't testing to learn about human endurance. You were testing to find a limit you could control, a weakness you could exploit. And when you couldn't find it quickly, you got scared and you got mean. Protests erupted from the collective representatives. Jathic called for order, their projection flickering with agitation. These are serious accusations. Do you have evidence of malicious intent? Marcus smiled then, expression that made Velksith's tentacles coil with remembered dread. I have your own research notes. Dr. Velksith was very thorough. On day 7, they wrote in the observation log, subject continues to resist expected psychological collapse. Recommend accelerating stress protocols to force compliance before human diplomatic corps begins inquiries. About subject's absence, the chamber erupted. Velksith felt their biochemistry flood with shame hormones as their own words were displayed for all to witness. They had written that. In scientific language, they had documented their fear and their choice to escalate torture rather than admit failure. You wanted me to break, Marcus continued, speaking over the chaos, because humans are new here. We're crude and violent compared to your enlightened civilizations. We evolved on a world you classify as too dangerous for colonization. And that scares you, because you've built your galactic society on the assumption that more advanced technology means more advanced ethics. But we're proof that's not always true. He paused, taking a drink of water from a container that he had brought himself, trusting nothing provided by the collective. You're all so proud of your knowledge, your science, your sophisticated civilization. But you forgot the most basic rule of sentient interaction. Don't do things to people that you wouldn't want done to you. It's not complicated. Children on Earth understand it. We sought knowledge. Velksith found themselves saying, speaking without permission, unable to remain silent. We needed to understand human capabilities for the security of the collective. Marcus turned to face the researchers' gallery, his eyes finding Velksith among the crowd. You could have asked. You could have reviewed our medical literature, our military training manuals, our sports medicine research. Humans love sharing information. We put it on something called the Internet, where anyone can access it. You could have learned everything you wanted to know without hurting anyone. The simplicity of that truth was devastating. Velksith had access to Earth's public databases. They all did. The information had been freely available. And they had chosen torture instead, because they wanted subjects who could not refuse data that could not be falsified. and results that confirmed their preconceptions. Javik regained control of the chamber, their voice carrying forced authority. The Council acknowledges serious irregularities in research protocol. However, we must consider the context. Human endurance capabilities were unknown, and the collective has a responsibility to assess potential threats. Threats? Marcus's laugh was harsh. You want to talk about threats? Let me tell you what Earth is doing right now. They're building faster ships because they want to explore. They're training diplomats because they want to make friends. They're investing in translation technology because they want to understand other species better. But you know what else they're doing? He pulled out a data tablet, authorization codes flickering across its surface. They're reading this testimony. Right now, in real time, this entire hearing is being broadcast to Earth. 43 billion. Humans are watching you decide whether torturing one of us was acceptable science. And they're making judgments about the collective based on what you do next. The chamber went absolutely silent. Even the ambient life support systems seemed to hold their breath. Velksith understood the game Marcus had been playing from the beginning. This was never about one human suffering. It was about forcing the collective to reveal their values on a galactic stage. Humanity endures, Marcus said quietly into that silence. It's what we do. We survive ice ages and disasters. We cross oceans on wooden boats. We climb mountains because they're there. We go to space on controlled explosions. And when someone tries to break us, we have a choice. We can break, or we can show them exactly why they should have left us alone. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of species. I didn't break. I'm not special. There are billions of humans who could have done the same thing, maybe better. And every single one of them is now wondering if the collective is worthy of their friendship, or if you're just another group of bullies who hide cruelty behind scientific terminology. What do you want? Javik asked, and for the first time, Velksith heard fear in the council director's voice. I want you to release all the research data publicly, Marcus said. No redactions, no classified sections. I want every species in the collective to see exactly what you did. I want the researchers sanctioned, not because I'm vindictive, but because ethics violations should have consequences. And I want every test subject in your archives checked to verify they gave informed consent and weren't tortured like I was. That could reveal sensitive collective security information. Javik protested. Then you shouldn't have built your security on the suffering of unwilling subjects, Marcus replied. These are my terms. Accept them, and Earth considers this an unfortunate incident that's been addressed. Refuse them, and we'll address it ourselves, and I promise you won't like how humans handle grievances. Velksith watched the political calculation happen in real time. Javik was consulting with advisors, their projection flickering as data streams were analyzed. The math was simple. One human's demands versus the potential hostility of an entire species that had just demonstrated it did not break under pressure. The Council accepts your terms. Javik finally announced. All research data will be released to public archives within 2 cycles. The researchers involved will face formal ethics review. And the collective apologizes to you, Marcus Chun, and to humanity for this violation of trust. Marcus nodded slowly. I want the apology in writing, on official documents preserved in permanent records. Because humans have long memories, and we tell stories about the things done to us. Your apology becomes part of our history, and maybe someday it becomes part of a better future. The hearing concluded with administrative details and procedural formalities, but Velksith barely registered them. They were staring at Marcus Chun, at this ordinary cargo hauler who had turned scientific torture into a diplomatic victory, who had weaponized his own suffering to force change. As the chamber emptied, Velks